Hello humans, hello humans. It's 8:13 a.m. on the 18th of September 2024. Going to use other things as teachable moments here, but if you look at the background behind me, you'll see that, damn Windows update. It appears as though foggy and so on. We have to be careful these days in making assumptions about anything that comes across digital media, okay? Because digital is basically a threshold. You miss the area between the 0 and the 1, right? It triggers on 0 or it triggers on 1. It's like the thermostat in your house. You set it for 70 degrees and you come on in at 71 or 72 and it's like, well, what's going on? Well, it has to get the whole area up over the 70 before it triggers, before it crosses that threshold and shuts things off. So the camera here is responding to its depth of field and the software telling it to focus on my face. Thus, it grays out all of this stuff behind me. It's not actually foggy. It's actually a reasonably nice day out there. But the angle of light and everything has tricked the digital equipment into responding this way. Thus, I don't take anything that comes through any devices at its face value. I want to see how that device was, or where that device was, what was the environment at the time it was being used, and then I'll make a decision on the veracity of the material coming out of it, right? So I can say quite definitively, no, it's not foggy here. It's lightly cloudy. The sun's rising and you can see the chemtrails off in the distance, but no fog whatsoever. So this is the kind of thing I wanted to bring up, all right? I'm getting at trying to get to the end of the data, and I've gotten past the cross links, and now I'm doing what's known as MOM, model of model space reconciliation against the data to see if I can pick out any errors. But in any event, so this kind of stuff happens all the time. This sort of digital effect artifact creeping into our environment and decisions being made on an artifact, not the actual environment, not the actual circumstances. Okay, this is something that real good, solid thinkers in the military, in some parts of government, work very diligently to try to overcome. They understand how limiting digital equipment is because of this threshold value thing, which is why I'm just so thrilled that analog computing is starting to come back, because analog computing gets that space between the 1 and the 0 and reports accurately as to what it was. And you can even set, using digital software techniques, you can even set triggers on analog thresholds, and so you get nuance. There's no nuance in digital computing. It's really stupid. That's why AI is really stupid here in digital world, right? It'll be better when we get analog sensors that we can put in analog self-referential feeds, okay? Anyway. So, been a bunch of stuff that's come up, and once again, I need to define terms. This is a good one, I think, anyway. So, I frequently think of people as idiots, okay, and I call them idiots, and I try not to do so online or out in public much, because people don't understand the definition of that term, and they're going to think I'm calling them stupid, or which many times they are. But when I say idiot, I have a very specific focus, right? Because it comes from the ancient Greek, and in the ancient Greek, idiot meant someone who was a normie. Okay, ancient Greeks called people idiots the way we call people normies. It took a long time before it became derisive, but in ancient Greek, the word idiot, idiotes or something, meant someone without, meant a private person, a regular guy, okay? Joe Schmo on the street, right? Somebody without office here's how they defined it. A private person without office rank, or specialized knowledge. So basically they were saying, it's okay for you to make this decision. This is where I ran across it way back when. I mean, probably 50 years ago, maybe. So in my 20s, I got into this bit of esoteric ancient literature that kept referencing all of this stuff and these conversations in Greek, and I had to dive into it for a bit. Anyway, and so the conversations would go to the idea that there were these two guys, one of which is trying to educate the other about esoteric knowledge, and he keeps referencing the idiots. And they're speaking in Greek, and it wasn't Attic and it wasn't Ionic. It was another dialect of Greek. So I had a hell of a time. I didn't have AI or anything to assist me. I had a hell of a time tracking down even a quasi-accurate translation. And the book in English that I had was not accurate. It had been translated by a guy in England in like the 1800s, and he slanted everything a particular way. In any event, so idiot meant a private person without rank, office, or specialized knowledge, basically a normie. And so I use that term in reference to woo guys, right? People that are out there attempting to tell you they know some shit, or at least describe their own journey in getting to know some shit. And in that sense, they're proffering themselves as though they have some level of knowledge, and yet they act as an idiot. They act as a normie in some instances. And frequently, they don't see how they're falling into this trap of acting like a normie, of seeing things like a normie. So I saw one this morning, which was this tweet by the health ranger guy, right? And he's saying we're all doomed. He's convinced that the end times in the Bible are those last 3.5 years, and we're all going to be smashed to shit by comets and meteors and crap, and the whole earth will be consumed. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Enjoy it. It's not going to happen. The tribulation in the Bible and all of this stuff is so garbage, you can't trust any of it. He's acting as an idiot. He's acting as a normie. He's acting as a Bible thumper. He is not using his own analytical skills that he used to see the great deception out there to apply to the material that he's relying on now. So he's participating as a normie by not applying his specialized knowledge, not using his rank, which we would take as experience in the conspiracy world, right? And he's not using his office, which is his platform, effectively. And in my opinion, he's not doing it in good conscience, right? I can see how you get freaked out, but you have to understand that he's getting freaked out over the Bible, and the Bible is like not reputable. It's like, which Bible, guy? I know that there existed at one point over 1,200 of these, 1,200 disparate books. And so scripture is a word meaning written, okay? It's not it doesn't apply anything in the sense of scripture meaning it's coming from God. It simply means it's some shit that was written down by somebody. All of the books of the Bible have no authors. We don't know who the fuck wrote any of this. We do know, for instance, that a lot of the individuals within the Bible did not exist at the time that the events that were being told about them were put into the Bible. We also know that 90% of the Old Testament stuff comes from ancient Egyptian and Akkadic and Sumerian. It had nothing to do with the Jews, didn't happen in Egypt. There's no archaeological evidence that there were ever Jews in captivity in Egypt. None of them ever built the pyramids or anything. There's no evidence ever of there's nothing on the bottom of the Red Sea to indicate that there was ever any kind of, parting of the waters or anything. And we have alternative we have the history of the books themselves that call it all into question. So I don't trust self-referential books. I do not trust self-referential material. I would examine and apply some level of trust to material that was self-referentially expositive. That is, it provided every one of its the necessary building blocks to those conclusions as it was going along. And perhaps I could have a lot of confidence in a book that was self-initiatory, in the sense that as you read it, your mind was indeed becoming aware of its effect on you, right? I read a lot of these kind of books. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, just reading it alters you. A lot of the Vipassana authors, the great Buddhist authors, did that as they wrote the material. They made the material itself into part of a self-initiatory process, because they wouldn't be around. They knew they wouldn't be alive for these people that were going to encounter this. Anyway, so I don't trust the Bible, the King James Version. It doesn't matter any of the modern versions. I've got maybe 40 of the versions now. And most, my way of thinking, by the way, is that there's a lot of religions out there, and then there's the Bible believers, and then on the other side of that, there's the Christians. The two are not necessarily the same, and frequently are not the same. And that, these Bible people are, in my opinion, they're all idiots. They're all deluded, and they don't examine the source material. And so, I can sit back and laugh at them. What? You believe that because of that? In this particular year, or across these centuries, we know these instances in which it was polluted, in which it was deliberately altered. And you can't even say that you've read the original, in the sense of going to an interlinear Bible where it's translated word by word. And then, let's get factual and say that, we know that Noah, Moses, two of the other guys I forget, as well as the lineage people, David and Daniel, didn't exist at the time that the Old Testament was first set down, right? It had 3 or 4, it had 150 years of being written down before those characters entered into it. Very, very startling to a lot of people that, oh, Moses didn't exist in the Bible. None of that shit that had Moses in it was in fact occurred at that time to these people, or any of it. So none of it's historical. It's all allegoric. And here you have, a lot of people. You have Bo Polney out there saying, the timeline of Daniel is predicting, stock market. It's like, well, okay, fine, but Daniel didn't exist the way you understand him, nor did any of that time stuff happen. It was all put down in this particular version of the Bible, but I can show you 5 other versions of the Bible that disagree wildly with that. And we know that Daniel didn't exist as I say. I mean, it's a carryover, a copied personality set that we can see going all the way back through a lot of these guys, going back through ancient Egyptian, and into ancient Egyptian seems to be the source for a lot of it. Because if you go over to Akkadian, the Akkadian appears to take it from the same stories, from ancient Egyptian myths and so on. And a lot of this is the basis for Freemasonry, is that they think they've got the ultimate real religion, and that you're a stupid idiot for believing in the Bible, right? And also they appear to be anti-Christian. In a lot of the symbols and mythology and so on, it appears to be supporting the Elohim worship cult. But that brings me back to what I wanted to talk about anyway. So, the health ranger guy, Mike Adams, is he's freaking out, comets, meteors. Yeah, that's fine, 3.5 years. Well, at least he'll be over it quickly before it does too much damage to him, right? The getting trapped into the mental constructions here. Okay, so factually, we know that, for instance, we have historical records that hardly anybody ever talks about, of such things as, the fall of Rome, right? All these various invasions of Rome, the fall of these various cities. There was a famous one in Spain. I can't remember the name of it now, or which city it was, but it was a walled city, and it was fell to the Moors. Then, 800 years later, it fell once again to the Christians, pushing the Moors out. The Moors were a form of Mohammedan. I don't think it'd be fair to really call them Muslim. They certainly were not Islamic as we understand that term. In any event, so nuances aside, a lot of these falls of these cities and so on were done from internally, just like the United States is supposedly falling now, collapsing now to the invaders, and the invaders are being bussed in. Okay, in all these cases, the people doing it are the Elohim worship cult. The invaders today, as well as the people that opened the gates in Rome, as well as the people that opened the gates at Cadiz, I think it was in the city of Cadiz in Spain, opened up all the gates to the invaders, were all internal people within the city, right? And these people were Elohim worship cult guys who hide inside the Jewish population, thus yet another reason for these cities to expel Jews was that they thought they were all turncoats. They couldn't trust any of them because they, the ones who betrayed the cities, etc. And so you get this nasty building reputation thing over time. We've got 800 or 900 years of this shit going on, and here we are today at this particular juncture. Now we've got a fairly interesting variant on this, in the sense that we know the history, we know the playbook, it's being countered. The infiltration, the communist eruption, all of this stuff is being deftly so far, sometimes instances are not so deft, but is being deftly countered, and the communists and the Elohim worship cult are being led down a primrose path in their efforts to now, there are a lot of serious questions you can ask about our situation and about the players in our situation. We undoubtedly must ask them, and we've probably gone through quite a few of them. In my mind, one of those serious ones is that it stems from the concept of, are these players, are these people that are opening the gates and paying to move all of the migrants and causing the communist takeover and all of that? A lot of them are doing this genuinely. They actually are communists. They've been educated to believe that. They actually think like Donald Trump is Hitler, that sort of thing. And even then, they don't understand the context of Hitler. Hitler was just yet another one of these iterations in this plan that didn't go as far as they wanted it to, right? Or as far as they thought they could take it. So we're back here yet again. The same iteration, the same players, the same memes, the same myth metrics that are being applied to the whole situation, the same magics being applied to try and get things to arrive to this particular conclusion that they've been trying for about 300 plus years. Speaking of the Freemasons and their antecedents, the Jesuits, the Catholics, and all of these kind of guys, right? Okay, so the Elohim worship cult is doing all of this and getting a lot of people to act as idiots, to act without reacting to their own knowledge base and say, okay, wait a second, before I go off and spout on all these comets coming, or, you know, giant market crash because, you know, supposedly they looted some city in some year in a country that didn't exist and has been, you know, historically inaccurately reported. Before you do that, you should examine what's going on in the broader scale and then apply your own level of discrimination, discernment, right? And so that's my big bitch about Carrie Cassidy, other than her fear porn about AI and her fixation on AI, which I find troubling, but in any event, is that she has no discernment. And so she hasn't tried to falsify anything that this and so she spits it out as though it's factual, and is causing, you know, disinformation and pollution in the woo sphere that we all have to wade through in order that we might not look like idiots, normies, in responding to all of this, right? Normies react to shit. They don't think about things before responding. And so, you know, they have no specialized knowledge. They're just going along to get along. They're not in any sense actively involved in the political life of the society in which they find themselves. But now we all are, because of all this shit stuff, right? Because the nut jobs are trying to, their final push, the Freemasons are trying to take over and all of that, you have to be very, very, very astute in order not to be caught out as an idiot by not applying your discrimination to something that has suddenly appeared and just reacting to it. All right, so we are in a time right now where we've had fulfillment of forecasts that go back in my work, I don't know, maybe 20 years, about increasing UFO activity, et cetera, right? Pushing us into this point that we'll cross at some point here in these next couple of years where we can look back and say, hey, we're now in sci-fi world. That's the free energy period. It's going to be extremely chaotic. That'll be the $600 silver period, all of this kind of stuff. Going to be chaotic beyond understanding. But we're actively walking into that now. So it pays for us to not be walking in and behaving as idiots, right? To be savvy to what's going on. So we have to understand that fear motivates lots of people, okay? And fear of the unknown, okay? So perhaps that's what motivates Carrie Cassidy, that AI is unknown to her, and thus she is very afraid of it. It's something that, you know, people talk about in scary terms, and it just hits her that way. Fear of the unknown affects us all. And this is, of course, certainly true of fear of aliens and whatever the fuck they may be up to, because they're so unknown, in spite of all the bullshit that's all come out in the woo world, you know, over the last 80 years about, okay, so, but we're in a period of time with the escalation of the UFO information coming out and the appearance of reaction within the society to that information, both as information and as it coming out and affecting the society itself, which is disturbing to government. So government is disturbed on the basis of they've got to react to the UFOs and the shit they're doing, but they've also got to react to this information coming out in a general way across the society and what the society is going to do. Government's big thing, their primary thing is fear motivated, right? They are very afraid of the, they're very afraid of the aliens. There's no question about that. The more savvy the individuals are as they get up and rise up in the government, the more the fear of the aliens and the capacities that they possess intrudes on the thinking of these individuals. But a lot of it is the fear of the impact on the social order. And as we get into those fears, you see that the primary one among them is the impact on religion. And you've got a whole lot of people that are Bible believers, okay? They're not Christians. These are people that believe somehow that the stories that are in this book reprocessed, thrown in over different centuries, and these people never investigate the actual history of the book they're reading, and they don't apply any level of discrimination to that. There are a number of these people that are within the alien UFO infrastructure within government that are actively freaking out and even if they were not so inclined to do it consciously, their subconscious actions, their subconscious drives, their fear of their religion situation relative to the aliens is such that they're doing everything they can to shoehorn all this alien stuff into the demon business. And thus that particular level of reaction. Now, I don't know what that buys anybody to consider an alien to be a demon, and it's in there, you know, tearing grandmother in half. Well, I don't give a shit if it's an alien or a demon. And we don't know why they're fucking with us. We think we have some reasons, but we really don't know. And there's no real consensus about that. And I would worry about a consensus anyway, because consensus would be an idiot approach to it. It would be a normie approach, okay? So anyway, though, but we're at that point now where UFO activity is ratcheting up and the government's responding. And we're going to soon get into these serious congressional hearings, okay? We have to understand that they're going to be tiptoeing. The congressional hearings, everybody involved with it is going to be tiptoeing around the power centers of these religious Bible evangelicals, not Christians, but these Bible believers who believe in the book over Christ, okay? If it didn't, you know, if Christ did it, but it isn't in the book, he didn't do it, that kind of thing, right? So these guys are power centers within the UFO structure, within the black ops kind of world thing, and they're actually protecting a lot of the corporate self-serving infrastructure that's gotten into the technology. So it's getting really complex, and you know, pretty soon they'll describe such complexities and complications in such a way as to denigrate Byzantine, right? We used to think of Byzantine as the most complex political structures on the planet because of, you know, everybody always backstabbing everybody else and all of this kind of thing. But that's nothing compared to where we are, especially with the alien issue. But as the congressional hearings and stuff go forward, bear in mind that this is going to have a big impact on all the normies, all the idiots, okay? Because they have no specialized knowledge. They won't be aware of the Mauro Baglinos, of the people that are doing accurate history of the Bibles and the Bibles, and showing how many there were and how many were discarded and how many were burned deliberately and destroyed because of the stuff that was in them, yada, 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 yada. And so the normies are going to be presented with a situation where they're going to have to face the presumptions, or even just the questions. They're going to have to face the questions about their religion because of the space aliens showing up, and because of the talk about the space aliens showing up. So bear in mind, the first time the UFO guys in Congress start talking about big giant spaceships here floating over our nuke plants, and these spaceships the size of a battleship, so if the individuals are our size or even up to 9 feet high, there might be 2,000 or 3,000 of these guys that could be put in on these vessels. And that instantly brings us back to, well, the gods are back, right? The return. Now, especially since the Elohim worship cult believes that these space aliens are gods, and they cast everything in that light, and they're the ones that are supporting and pimping out the evangelicals who are freaked out about the idea that their book is going to be called into question, because they have no faith in Christ, they have a faith in the book. So this is an interesting period of time, this juxtaposition, this conjunction of events and mental themes that have gone through humans for centuries and centuries, and the appearance of outside forces, entities that we know for a fact are fucking with us, right? And we don't know why, right? They're very duplicitous. They don't come down and tell us. Now, if I'm going to interact with an anthill, I'm not going to bother to introduce myself. So it may be something like that. But under the circumstances, I don't believe so. Many of the reasons I don't believe it have to do with the work I've done on the mind-to-machine interface that is in ancient literature. The descriptions of it, not so buried, not so hidden in hymns and ancient religious texts and all of this other stuff, right? So we've been here before. We know about all of these aliens and how they've done stuff with us. And again, this does not give those of us who are not idiots, not behaving as normies, it does not give us a lot of confidence in dealing with these people if the normies take either presumptive approach. So if they were to assume, like Stephen Greer, if they were to follow his advice and assume that all aliens are beneficent, that they're not here to harm us, that's a big failure. It leaves you to a giant level of vulnerability that is not warranted. You shouldn't be that vulnerable because we have historical evidence that these guys were evil to humans, right? We even have, but we have it all planet-wide. We know the bands, the latitudes that the space aliens occupied in the ancient past, and if you go through any of those, and we also know those regions they left alone because of temperatures, we think. But if you go to these areas where we found pantheons of gods, they all behave the same. So the German gods, Wotan and all of his crew, and Thor and all of those guys were every bit as bloodthirsty as the Mesoamerican gods, who are every bit as human bloodthirsty as the Elohim, or the Anunnaki, or the Devas, any of these guys, right? So they're all behaving the same. Are they simply all stories about the same group? This seems to be the most likely case. And then we have to account for the temporal fluctuation and appearance of these books and stuff. In any event, so I think we're going to get a lot of information out about Antarctica. I think we're going to discover in these next few months, we're going to start getting into this period of time where its secrets revealed, where all this shit starts pouring out. One of the, and the secrets will be, I think, impactful from the point we get into specific things about Antarctica onward. I have reasons to believe this. Once it's happened, then I'll be able to say, okay, look guys, here's the impact, here's the language appearing. It should be fairly obvious in the social media once it occurs. But from a particular point onward, then we're really into the period of time of educating the idiots, of starting to take all the normies who are now awakened to this idea, oh my God, what's this? You know, my God is a space alien and it's been transmitted by, you know, deliberately altered and deceptive text over the centuries. And why was that? And, you know, all this other stuff, right? That's what the powers that be fear. And this is like, even in my opinion, this is one of the motivating factors for like Juan O'Savin, is that once you start examining the space aliens, the Bible scriptures disappear. They had no authority at that point, because then you know that it was a space alien that was behind it and a bunch of stupid humans that reported it as though it was gods, just the way that the cargo cults formed in the Pacific when these airplanes would land and the GIs would throw out chocolate bars and this kind of thing to the locals in order not to be speared, right? And so the locals didn't understand the motivation of the gods landing in these devices, but they liked the chocolate bars. And then one day the gods didn't come back, and so they started trying to get them back and develop their cult of, you know, creating fake airplanes and fake radar and all this other stuff. They figured if we could create the infrastructure, even though it's made out of sticks and bamboo and mud and shit, maybe the gods will reappear and give us those damn chocolate bars again. And that's basically how a lot of humanity is going to operate. And they're going to be really shocked to discover that, you know, the gods are returning, and they ain't gods, right? It's a bunch of GIs in uniforms and a bunch of the government issue, right? And they're going to be not so nice. It's not necessarily going to be a pleasant experience for the normies, both internally going through this impactful wall of internal reconciliation of faith and fact, as well as the impactful wall of the aliens and their behavior and the impact on human history going all the way back that now forces us to re-examine everything. And so it's like, okay, guys, yeah, you know, 4 years from now, I'll be quite happy to talk to the health ranger about what happened and why it didn't occur. Now, also bear something else in mind. My data fell for this, and I fell for this as well. I was trapped into this as well. The Elohim worship cult has been inculcating their plan, their mind control, their MK Ultra shit since the 50s. They've been seeding it into language, movies, television shows, radio, everything, just putting it out there constantly. So there is this linguistic wave that goes through our social order that you can track that I didn't even start to suspect was there until I started getting off on all of these predictions on my data relative to natural events and stuff. It's because the data, the language itself, is seeded with this false idea of catastrophism, right? That we're always in this process of being in giant catastrophes. And that seeding has been going on. I found it going back as far as 1949, but it really came into effect in 1953. And that was also the year we had 80 visits of multiple UFOs to the Washington, D.C. area. at night and in the day, flying around, multiple ones. You know, there was some communications going on then. And no, it wasn't that Valiant Thor shit. That was a single source of crap in 1967 from a science fiction book from a CIA guy, a CIA operative. It was another seed idea. Supposedly written about this space alien from Venus that came and lived in the Department of Defense for 3 years in the 1950s. But the idea was to seed all of the climate change shit, right? Even in the 60s, they were seeding all of that into all of these books. That's why Hapgood, I think his name was Charles Hapgood, but Hapgood was the originating point for the idea of a pole shift, of a crustal pole shift, which can't happen, of the life in the ocean. Because it would require, to shift 1 degree on the Earth would require, that's 111 kilometers. So all of a sudden I would be shifted 111 kilometers. Now, if it happens over the course of, 55,000 years, big deal, right? Or so on, right? That's pretty fast. But if it were to happen in a lifetime, and then many people say it's going to shift and come back, which, like, no, 9 billion times that. Any kind of a crustal shift at all. And also, Hapgood was misinterpreting evidence because he did not have Neil Adams' view of the expansion of Earth. And if you look at it, if Earth were collapsed back down to 60% of its size, the relative gravity and stuff would support things like, giant dinosaurs. Whereas giant dinosaurs could not exist on this planet now because they couldn't grow a heart big enough to pump the blood up to their brain. The largest creatures that exist on this planet now are the giraffes, and giraffes have been shrinking over time because of the pressure of trying to pump blood up through that neck to the brain. And it's because gravity is increasing as the mass of our planet increases as it expands. So giraffes are doomed to be a thing of the past, and probably in the future humans will be smaller and much denser, much more well-constructed bones, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I got to get this done. I got to get on cleaning and so on. All right, so the arrival, the discussion of preceding an arrival or preceding an appearance of UFOs, but the discussion from normie land coming out from officialdom about the UFOs is going to upset everything relative to the historical underpinnings of our society that are based on any religion and all religions, because now all religions are thrown into the waste bin and suspect. You'll still have tons of adherents. You'll still have lots and lots and lots of idiots, slash AKA normies, who believe in this stuff, believe in the books and so on. But it's now started the process of discrediting it all. The whole thing is crashing. This is going to be extremely upsetting to all the Islamists, okay, all the really fundamental, ritualized believers, right? Also all of the fundamental ritualized rabbis, all the people that have that shit twisting as little mind rats. That's what ritual does to you. It reduces your ability to be a flexible thinker. And so a lot of these guys are going to behave badly and end up getting the consequences of behaving badly as we go forward. Now, a lot of the normies are going to freak out too. And this is going to participate in the disruptions and so on that I was talking about relative to the big mega churches. The data sets were quite clear that a lot of these mega churches will provide lots of drama as their congregations go through the absorbing of and integration of this stuff that's going to be coming out. So it's going to be awful hard to say, no, there's no possibility that my religion or the Bible or anything was affected by space aliens, when you've got, a giant battleship-sized space alien spaceship hovering over a nuke plant and our government's freaking out about it. So, it will be the transmission of the impactful emotions, the emotions generated by that impact within the officialdom. It will be that transmission. They're talking about it will leak out all of this to their eye movements, their facial feature movements, all of this kind of stuff are going to be what really starts freaking out all the normies, because that is part of the 68, that's a guess, percent of communication that is nonverbal. And so this will be transmitted as we go through, in spite of the fact that you can't trust digital presentation. Enough of it will come through that we'll get this emotional transference, right? And we're in that period of time now. This may coincide, and it's not possible for me to discriminate within the data sets because you got the two sets are basically tracking, so I can't really pick out any temporal difference between the two, but this also may coincide with actual appearance of space aliens in the sky. In a general sense, for lots and lots of us. We know that there's a lot of uptick in this. We're seeing a lot of the videos of the space aliens bopping around and checking us out and that kind of thing. Okay, so the thing to understand is, in my opinion, the thing to bear in mind as you go forward is the potential that anybody and everybody and all of us will fall back into being idiots at time in hypernovelty when we're pressed by floods of information and new stuff coming in. And that we have to be aware of our own emotional state and our own emotional propensity to give weight to information that should not have that weight emotionally added to it in our minds, okay? In other words, really examine yourself as you are examining incoming information. Just make sure that yourself, your body and everything is tuned well enough that you could rely on its impression of that information. Because now we have to ask ourselves, the language I saw of the health ranger on the tweet was not analytical, it was not a conclusion being presented in an analytical fashion. It was the result of, there's lots of emotional tainting to the way that information was presented, as though he had got a conclusion that is then solidified in his mind by its juxtaposition with this emotional state that he was in, and aha, it's factual. So this is what happens to lots of people that are Bible believers. They read something at the same time, or they come across and have a thought about the Bible or something at the same time that they have this particular emotional state. The two seem to be bonded in their awareness, and thus they have the idea that this is, the information is factual or whatever. This is the same thing that happens to all the woo people. The people that do the tarot card reading, or the people that do the astrology, or whatever the hell the divination process is, it is very easy to have you have somebody participate in such and not be aware of their own emotional state towards a propensity towards belief. Now, the word belief comes from ancient Teutonic, right? Old German, like super old, even older than German, and goes into the roots of the of our understanding of ourselves. We use that word constantly. Belief. It's actually two words, belief, and it means I wish, okay? And so you're really saying, I wish this to be true. So every time you say, I believe the Bible, well, you're saying to me, because I know these words, you're saying, I wish this to be true. And it's like, well, okay, good on you, dude. Doesn't mean anything in there is factual just because you wish it to be true. And you'd better pop up the receipts before you're going to try and before I'm going to be convinced of any of this stuff on your particular agenda there. And so the statement from comets and meteors and stuff, in my opinion, is just that. He believes it. I'm quite certain of it. It's an emotional stance. There's no receipts presented, and it's like, okay, fine, enjoy that situation, and we'll see you in 4 years, and we can discuss it, right? Because he thinks that we're in these 3.5 years of Elohim worship cult, of which he is one, right? Because he's a believer in the Old Testament. He's a believer in the book itself. and thus he is a believer, but he doesn't understand that he's worshiping these space aliens that were at the core of the Old Testament, right? In spite of the fact that it's actually a garbaged version, and like I say, didn't have all these principal characters in it at the beginning. Theoretically, the Old Testament was orally transmitted for hundreds of years, and even if that were the case, in that period, in those hundreds of years, the characterization of individuals within there being transmitted from generation to generation to generation would obviously have changed. And then after they started writing it down, some 150 years later, we see the first appearance of Noah and Moses, and then later on we see the appearance of these other individuals, including the now renamed David and Daniel, and so and others. I mean, there's like 30 or 40 characters within the Old Testament, within the Torah, that appear after it had been written down for a couple of hundred years. And the linguistic expansion is quite noticeable, as well as also the linguistic technical loss. So you have to understand that at the time that the Torah was being written into Hebrew, it was not being written, in my opinion, from an oral tradition. The reason I say this is that we find analogs. We find those same stories written in ancient Greek with a lot more detail and a lot more technical analysis. But they're not recognized as the same stories in Hebrew because Hebrew was and is such a limited language. At the time that the Torah was being written down, from which we get the Old Testament, ancient Greek had over 250,000 words, and the Torah had less than 10,000, or the Hebrew had less than 10,000 words. So there was a language shrinking effect. And that is, they just threw out bunches, they translated it out of Greek into Hebrew, and in the process just threw out tons of stuff because there was no word that replicated that Greek word in Hebrew at that time. And they also applied lots of Hebrew words repetitiously to many things, many diverse things that were being described in Greek. So it would be like there was not a word for hippopotamus, so they described all these things as horses. And there was not a word for a mule, so they described all mules as horses. There was not a word for donkey, and so they described all donkeys as horses. This is just a very bad example, but that's the kind of thing that went on. That there was such a limited descriptive vocabulary in Hebrew at that time that they applied the descriptions very broadly and inaccurately. And this is the book that all these people are believing. So, anyway, but this is just my opinion. This is just my analysis. I'm an old crazy bastard, but I'm an old crazy bastard with a predictive bent here. And the prediction is that we're about to get the idiots shaken up, all the normies shaken up, these people without any kind of specialized knowledge, because that specialized knowledge is going to start being dumped out and they don't have any context with which to absorb it and deal with it. And this is going to be chaotic in and of itself. It'll settle down in a lot of years, but this is going to really participate in everything. It's going to totally undo all Jewish claims to being chosen people, which is really the Elohim thing anyway, and other and much greater impacts globally. So anyway, it can be very dangerous. People are not going to be in their right frame of mind. Idiots will be dangerous to be around, especially in groups. You're not going to want to make yourself too known, too visible as outliers in groups, because the tendency to freak out, and it will be a brief period of time that this will occur. Might be 5 or 6 months, might be a year in some places. It's just going to be hard to say, right? And it's going to vary based on where you're at, and it'll also be a variable thing relative to the culture you're in and to their direct impact with this information coming out. So in the data sets I've got here, it's not appearing that everything is simultaneous around the planet. Yes, the information gets out and so on, but there's going to be eruptions of idiots running into reality walls intermittently over these next few years, maybe decades for all I know. But over these next few years, for sure, we'll have situations where we'll have like the hearings in Congress, and then everybody in the United States, or it starts burbling through our social order and we start getting all whipped up about it. UFO appearances here, prompt that, promote it, and then maybe it's a couple of months, maybe it's 6, 8 months or a year, all of a sudden there's going to be a big eruption of information and interaction with UFOs in the Mideast, okay? And that's because of appearances of the UFOs in the Mideast. I don't know that the gap is going to be 5 months. I know, you know, it might be 5 weeks. It's just indeterminate within the data. It just does show that it's not a simultaneous occurrence in terms of the emotional release language that accompanies all of this. And then there are other complications like the intrusion into all of this of the copycats, the alien reproduction vehicles, the humans that have this specialized knowledge. So we're all idiots relative to the breakaway civilization, right? Because we don't know. People claiming to know don't. So that being the case, we have to assume we're idiots and then approach all of this cautiously. Just because they are human and they're, you know, working for human Earth-based corporation does not necessarily make them your friend, right? Or even ally. And we've got to sort all this shit out as we go forward. And we're in the process of doing that now in a big way within mere weeks. Yeah, mere weeks. We'll be getting into some of this stuff in a very serious way. So take care, you know, don't be an idiot. Keep your eyes open and assume that you don't know what's going on. And so you're going to not put reliance on any of your sources until you've had a chance to, you know, vet them all and check them all out and think them all and you know, reconcile it all, that kind of thing. Because circumstances are going to change rapidly and you need to be flexible in your thinking, which frequently means I'm not going to react now. I'm going to sit and think about this shit and then I'm going to respond. There's a difference. Okay, guys, don't be idiots.